What does it truly cost a woman to dedicate her flesh, her faith, and her very soul to the God Emperor in a galaxy that devours hope? The question hangs at the edge of every whispered tale about the Sisters of Battle, but no one dares to answer it aloud. The Imperium prefers its saints polished and distant, trapped in stained glass glory without the grime that shaped them. Yet behind every hymn echoing across cathedral worlds lies a life carved by terror, loss, and unrelenting duty. Before a sister ever touches holy bolt or steel, she bleeds for years in the shadowed halls of the Shola Progenium, where childhood is a luxury stripped away like dead skin. The galaxy does not permit softness, and neither do the instructors who mold orphans into weapons sharpened by faith. Punishment becomes a language more familiar than affection, and prayer becomes the chain that holds sanity together. Those who falter vanish into silence, remembered only as warnings to the survivors. For the girl who will one day be known as Sister Aurelia, the future begins with a doorway and a choice she never understands. Taken from the ruins of her burned settlement, her earliest memories are the scent of ash and the clatter of chains against armored boots. She grows within stone walls that echo with sermons more severe than storms, each lesson shaping her into someone who must never question, never doubt, never rest. She learns to sleep with her back straight, to eat in silence, to pray until her knees bruise. The instructors speak of purity as if it is a blade that must be driven into her heart over and over until nothing unworthy remains. She begins to forget the sound of her mother's voice. She begins to forget she ever had a childhood. Her first glimpse of what she is meant to become arrives during a holy inspection. Fully armored sisters march through the Shola chapel, each step a thunderous promise of divine violence. Their presence is overwhelming, like standing too close to a star. Aurelia feels small, yet something deep within her stirs. The sisters do not bow, do not hesitate, do not tremble. They are faith made flesh, and the young novices feel their chests tighten with awe and fear. It is said that the Emperor himself sees through their eyes. It is also said that only the worthy can bear the weight of that gaze without breaking. The nights are the worst. When the candles are snuffed out and the dormitory sinks into darkness, the novices lie awake listening to the distant cries of those undergoing penance. Whispers travel like ghosts between bunks. Some say that the sisters who fail their trials are turned into living reliquaries, their bodies hollowed yet preserved, forever praying for forgiveness. Others insist they are simply sent to the guard, discarded like cracked tools. Aurelia never joins these whispered exchanges. She keeps her fears sealed behind her teeth, knowing the instructors can smell weakness like smoke. By the time she is 13, the Shola has already peeled away whatever childhood remained. Her hands are calloused, her faith a rigid fortress built atop old scars. Yet beneath the hymns and discipline, a quiet dread begins to grow. She realizes something profound and terrifying. The life of a sister of battle is not shaped by victory or glory. It is shaped by sacrifice without end. Every future moment will be a struggle against darkness so vast it could swallow the stars themselves. And she will be expected to face it with steady breath, unshaken devotion, and a heart that belongs entirely to the Emperor. Still, when the time comes to stand before the Canoness Superior and accept her trial of purity, Aurelia steps forward. Her voice does not waver. Her knees do not shake. Somewhere deep inside, she hopes that if she offers enough of herself, the Emperor might grant her the strength to survive what awaits. She does not yet understand that faith in the Imperium is not a gift. It is a bargain, and the price grows higher with every passing moment. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to breathe in an air that was never meant for human lungs? Sister Miriam learned this truth on the first world she ever stepped onto as a fully anointed daughter of the Emperor. Gotha's Prime, a planet already half drowned in war, its skies stained with the oily exhaust of 1,000 burning shrines. The moment her boots touched the scorched soil, the heat punched through her armor like a living thing. Even through her helm's filters, the stench of rot, machine ash, and old blood pressed against her senses. She had trained for years, endless drills, penance, prayer, flame, but nothing, not even the harshest trials of the Shola Progenium, prepared her for the truth of a real battlefield. It was not glorious, it was not holy, it was not clean, it was torment, carved into the air itself. Around her marched her sisters, chanting hymns, not out of calm devotion, but out of desperation, as if each syllable was a shield preventing their minds from splintering. The Canoness moved ahead, a towering shape of faith and fury, her rosary swaying like a pendulum of judgment. Miriam followed, clutching her bolter so tightly her gauntlet creaked. She remembered feeling fear then, and shame for feeling it. She whispered prayer after prayer, not for victory, but for the strength to keep walking. Her instructors had told her fear was natural, that only by acknowledging it could one burn it into holy purpose. Yet Miriam felt something far more dangerous, doubt. She wondered whether the emperor truly walked with them, or if they were walking alone into a devouring maw wearing his symbols like borrowed armor. The ground trembled, not with the march of tanks or artillery. This was deeper, resonant, as though the world itself groaned in agony. The canoness raised a fist. The entire column halted instantly. The air grew thick, heavy, wrong. Miriam felt it before she heard it, a pressure behind her eyes, like fingers digging from inside her skull. A whisper crawled along her mind, soft, intimate, curious. "Little candle," she gasped, instinctively clutching her rosary. Her vision swam. The deserts of Gotha's prime rippled like liquid heat. She blinked hard, fighting the sensation. The canoness spoke without turning. "Steel your spirits, daughters. The enemy is close." But it was not an enemy Miriam could see, yet. Her breath came rapidly, fogging her visor. She began reciting the canticle of purity, but the whisper pushed against each word, warping them in her mind, twisting them until the sacred verses sounded profane. She stumbled, knees threatening to buckle under the invisible weight. A veteran sister beside her placed a firm hand on her pauldron. "Hold fast," she murmured. "This is your first taste of the unclean. Do not let it root." Miriam nodded, though her heart hammered violently. She forced her breathing to steady. She forced her prayers to sharpen. She forced her mind to remain her own. Then, through the swirling heat haze ahead, figures began to appear, slow, shambling shapes, their silhouettes bent and trembling. Civilians, survivors, refugees. No. As the shapes came closer, the truth emerged. Bodies swollen with corruption, flesh sloughing like wet cloth, eyes bulging with pus and unnatural life. Each one a mockery of humanity, victims not merely of plague, but of the warp's loving, rotting touch. The horrors of Nurgle. Miriam felt her stomach twist. She had seen picked recordings of plague hosts before, but no image could capture the stench of them, the way their bodies pulsed with sickly vitality, as if disease itself had become a living organism wearing them like suits of meat. One of the creatures raised its head. Skin tore along its jawline in wet strands. Its mouth smiled. Light, it gargled. "I smell light." Miriam took a step back, bolter trembling. The canoness's voice thundered. "Daughters of the emperor, cleanse." The world erupted into thunder. And Sister Miriam's true horror began. The silence broke before dawn. Sister Miriam had barely closed her eyes when the cathedral's warning gongs roared to life, deep, metallic waves that vibrated through stone and bone alike. There was no time to think, no time to question. The doors of the dormitory slammed open as Canoness Veridia strode inside, her presence cutting through haze and exhaustion like a blade. "Battle formation. This world burns today." Those words were not shouted. They were delivered low, heavy, and absolute. And because they were quiet, they carried far more weight than any roar. Miriam rose with the others, her body trembling from exhaustion but her training forcing each movement into correctness. She dressed in her armor without thought, each clasp and seal falling into place as if commanded by instinct alone. Her power armor felt heavier that morning, almost punishingly so, as though it too sensed what was coming. As the sisters marched toward the fortress balcony, the sky outside glowed a sickly green. War had not just touched this world, it had already begun tearing it apart. Plumes of smoke rose from the horizon, twisting into shapes that mocked the form of saints and martyrs. Miriam felt her heartbeat stumble. This wasn't just another patrol. It was a full assault. When they reached the overlook, the truth revealed itself in horrifying clarity. Below, in the ash-soaked valley, the corruption had spread. Warped figures writhed within the shadows, twisted silhouettes that once had been human. They clung to their skin as if trying to escape their own flesh, whispering prayers to something that did not belong in the realm of mankind. The sisters around Miriam did not flinch. They formed ranks, a line of unbreakable faith. But Miriam, she wasn't unbreakable yet. Her breath caught when Canoness Veridia turned to them. "Today," she said, "you will understand the meaning of devotion. Today you will see the Emperor's light, or fall in its shadow." Then her gaze locked on Miriam. "You will be on the front line." The words struck like a blow. For a heartbeat Miriam wondered if the canoness saw something in her, weakness, fear, hesitation. Or perhaps she saw something else, something untested that needed to be broken before it could become pure. The march into the valley felt endless. Every step brought the air thicker with spores and decay. Every heartbeat brought the whispered voices, those faint, venomous murmurs that coiled like worms around the edges of sanity. As they drew closer, the corrupted humans turned toward them, their bodies twitching, limbs bending the wrong way, mouths stretched in silent screams. Miriam lifted her weapon, the weight of the bolter anchoring her to reality. Her hands were shaking. She prayed silently, not for victory, not for protection, but for the courage not to shame her sisters in the moment battle began. The canoness raised her sword. The air held its breath. And then, the world exploded into fire. Bolters roared in deafening unison. The corrupted surged forward, their charge an avalanche of madness. Miriam fired instinctively, her shots tearing through flesh that refused to die cleanly. Her shoulders jolted with each blast, the recoil forcing tears into the corners of her eyes. A twisted creature leapt toward her, its jaw splitting into three as it shrieked praise to something foul and nameless. She froze. Her mind blanked. Her soul trembled, and in that half-second of paralysis, the monster reached her. Its claws raked against her armor with a screech that rang like metal knives dragged across bone. Miriam stumbled. Her faith wavered. Her grip faltered. But then, a single voice cut through the chaos. "Sister Miriam, stand." Sister Aveline slammed into the creature with the force of a thunderbolt, her chainsword screaming as it carved through corrupted flesh. Blood hissed against the ground like acid. Miriam exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Aveline didn't look at her. She didn't need to, but her words lingered like a commandment carved into stone. "Stand." Miriam forced her feet to anchor. The trembling in her hands slowly stilled. The nightmares in the valley roared louder, but so did the fire inside her. And for the first time, she didn't run from it. She stepped into it. The order to advance came like a death knell, quiet, final, and impossible to refuse. The sisters formed a column, their armor whispering like steel ghosts as they moved deeper into the ravaged outskirts of the hive city. The air here was different, heavier, as though each breath filtered through layers of ash and old sins. Sister Miriam felt the temperature drop despite the flames still burning in the ruins around them. It was the kind of cold that did not belong to weather, but to presence. The kind of cold that made the mind instinctively recoil. Ahead, beneath a collapsed cathedral archway, shadows swirled unnaturally. They didn't move like normal darkness, they pulsed, recoiled, expanded, as if breathing. Every sister sensed it, every sister knew what such signs meant, yet not a single one hesitated. They had been raised to walk directly into the jaws of damnation with steady hearts. And so they marched, chanting a low hymn that trembled like a prayer held together by fear and duty. As they approached the ruins, the ground quivered faintly, as if something beneath the stone was stirring. Miriam tightened her grip on her bolter, feeling the faint sting where the rosary beads pressed into the skin of her gauntlet. She whispered a short prayer, not for safety, but for clarity. Clarity to accept whatever awaited beyond this threshold of shadow-warped dread. The darkness reacted first. It curled upward like smoke becoming solid, forming thin strands that stretched toward the sisters with a hunger that felt almost familiar, like the echo of a whispering voice Miriam had heard before, a voice she had spent her life resisting. She froze for a moment, not in fear, but in recognition. This was warped taint. This was corruption made manifest. And yet, it almost felt as if it knew her. As if it remembered her. One sister stepped too close. A tendril of shadow brushed against her pauldron, leaving behind a smear of shimmering corruption that pulsed like a heartbeat. She cried out, not a scream but a warning, and immediately Sister Superior Helena's voice thundered across the ruins. Her command cut through the air like a bolt of holy wrath. The chant intensified, their voices rising, and the shadows recoiled violently as if burned. But they were not retreating. They were gathering, converging, forming. A shape began to materialize in the archway, skeletal, towering, wrapped in rags of sentient darkness. The warp radiated from it like heat from a furnace, but inverted, draining warmth from the world instead of giving it. Its head tilted unnaturally, studying the sisters with an intelligence that was both ancient and starving. The sisters steadied themselves, forming a defensive semicircle. Miriam found her place among them, breath steady, heart strangely calm. This was no simple encounter. This was a test, a mark, a sign that whatever corruption had infected this hive was far more powerful and deeply rooted than the Imperium had been led to believe. The creature took a single step forward, and the stone beneath its feet rotted. Another step, corpses twitched in the rubble. Miriam felt something cold slip into her thoughts. A whisper, a memory, a voice calling her by a name she had abandoned as a child. A name she had hoped the galaxy had forgotten. For the first time since her initiation, she felt something crack inside her resolve, small, barely noticeable, but real. The thing of shadows lifted its head fully now, revealing eyes that glowed like coals buried in a dying fire. And then it spoke, not with a voice carried through air, but one poured directly into their minds, a voice like 1,000 buried souls exhaling in unison. The sisters staggered, but Miriam didn't. She stood frozen, stunned, because she realized something terrifying. Its voice was familiar, nearly personal, and the creature, this manifestation of warp sickness and blasphemy, was speaking to her first. The days that followed blurred into one another, each marked by the same gnawing tension that seeped into every shadow. Sister Alindra began to understand that warfare in the Imperium was not always fought against visible enemies. Some horrors thrived in silence, stalking the edges of sanity before ever revealing their form. She felt watched, even when alone. The basilica corridors whispered when she passed, the stale incense clinging to her senses like a warning. At night, if the few hours of restless half-sleep could be called night, she heard soft tapping against the stone walls. At first she dismissed it as settling masonry, but then the taps began to mimic patterns, rhythms, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Yet when she confronted it, blade drawn, the air remained still, the corridor empty except for her quickening breath. Her sisters grew quieter as well, as though the unseen pressure suffocated words before they could form. Conversations were shorter, prayers more frantic. Even Canoness Veridiana seemed burdened, her eyes drifting toward corners as if expecting something to step forward. Alindra noticed it especially during litany recitations. The older woman's chant trembled, only slightly, but enough to betray fear. And if she was afraid, the one forged by decades of unyielding faith, then what hope did the younger sisters have? Alindra tried to remain steadfast, to anchor herself in the Emperor's light, but doubt crept in cold and slow. She began to question whether the true threat on this doomed world was outside its walls, or already within them. Stranger still were the dreams, always the same, always beginning with the same suffocating darkness. Alindra would find herself in a vast void, no stars, no ground beneath her, yet she stood as though the nothingness itself carried her weight. Then, a voice, not a voice, more like a pressure, would press against her mind. It whispered her name, stretching the syllables, savoring them. She felt something circling her, unseen but immense, hungry. A sense of being catalogued, studied, chosen. She woke each time drenched in sweat under the thin ceramite sheets, her heart racing as the cathedral bells tolled morning prayer. She tried to dismiss the dreams as stress or fatigue, but deep down she knew they were not simply dreams. They had purpose. The other sisters began to show signs as well. Trembling hands during weapon maintenance, sudden nausea during mealtime, brief lapses of attention mid-chant. One sister, Seraphine, collapsed during firing drills, clutching her head and screaming as if something clawed at her mind. The hospitalers rushed her away, yet no one spoke of it afterward. The silence only deepened the fear. Alindra overheard snippets, voices, the walls, watching, before the hushed caretakers silenced the wounded girl. Whatever haunted them was not physical, at least not yet, but its influence was spreading like rot through the ranks. Alindra found herself praying longer, sometimes until her knees bled. She begged for clarity, for strength, for the Emperor's light to burn away whatever circled them. But the chapel candles flickered strangely around her, as though stirred by a breath she could not see. Her rosary beads felt colder each day, almost icy against her fingers. Still, she refused to falter. If the Emperor was testing her, she would not break. But she could not deny the growing truth. They were being hunted by an enemy that did not use claws or bolt guns, but whisper, doubt, and dread. And the worst part was this. The Sisters of Battle, paragons of unwavering faith, were beginning to crumble long before the first true blow even fell. The fires of battle never truly die, not for those who have been baptized in its relentless fury. Sister Helena moved through the ruined streets like a shadow of vengeance, her armor scorched, her hands trembling only slightly beneath the holy grip of her bolter. Every step she took was a prayer, every breath a whispered oath to the Emperor. Around her, the corpses of the heretic littered the ground, but she felt no triumph, only a hollow emptiness that gnawed at her from within. The faces of her fallen battle sisters flashed in her mind. Sister Katerine, who had smiled too brightly before the warp claimed her mind. Sister Junia, whose screams still echoed in the sanctum like a chorus of the damned. Helena wondered, not for the first time, if survival was a blessing or a curse. In the distance, the shadow of a greater evil loomed, a demon of the warp, its form writhing and impossible, as if the night itself had taken shape and come to consume her. The voices of the righteous could not drown out its mocking laughter. She knew she would have to face it, alone, and the thought of it made her chest tighten, as though the Emperor himself had pressed his judgment upon her. Every battle fought, every soul purged, had led her here, and yet the horror of what awaited seemed beyond the comprehension of even the most devout. And in that moment, as she steadied her grip and whispered a silent prayer for strength, she realized that the true terror of her existence was not the enemies outside, but the fear that she might one day become the monster she had sworn to destroy. The echoing shrieks of the warp grew louder as Sister Helena descended into the ruined cathedral, the once hallowed halls now twisted by corruption and shadow. The air itself felt alive, thick with the scent of ozone and decay, pressing against her like the weight of 1,000 accusing eyes. Her power armor hummed faintly, a fragile barrier against the unseen forces that sought to consume her mind. She could feel the gaze of the demon upon her, not with its eyes, no, its eyes were everywhere, but with a knowledge of her every doubt, every fear she tried to bury beneath faith and steel. Her bolter felt impossibly heavy, yet she could not let it fall. To do so would be to surrender, to allow the darkness to claim not just her body, but her soul. In that silence, broken only by distant, distorted whispers, she understood that the battlefield was no longer merely physical. The corruption of the warp seeped into thought itself, turning memories into weapons, turning her faith into chains. She clenched her fists and whispered the litanies she had recited since childhood, yet even the Emperor's name felt like a fragile shield against the cold, gnawing certainty that something irredeemable awaited her deeper in the cathedral's heart. Somewhere beyond the shattered altar, beyond the shattered statues and smoldering candles, she sensed a presence waiting, patient and hungry, and for the first time, she wondered whether she would leave this place at all, or if she had already walked too far into the abyss to return. Every step Helena took deeper into the cathedral felt like a descent into her own mind, a labyrinth of fear and doubt carefully laid by the warp. The shadows writhed along the walls, twisting into shapes that seemed almost human, almost familiar, faces of comrades lost, faces of enemies long dead, all merging into one horrifying mockery of life. Her prayers came faster now, words tumbled over each other, desperate, frantic, but even the Emperor's voice seemed distant, a fading echo in the oppressive darkness. And then she heard it, a sound that stopped her heart cold. Not a roar, not a scream, but a whisper, soft, intimate, and unmistakably cruel. You cannot save them, and you cannot save yourself. The words crawled into her mind, clawing at her faith, shaking the foundation of everything she had sworn to uphold. Helena's hands shook as she raised her bolter, though the shaking was not from fear alone, it was from the knowledge that the enemy she faced was not flesh and blood, but something far older, far more patient, and far more malevolent. The air around her thickened, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat a hammer against the prison of her sanity. Somewhere, deep within the cathedral's blackened depths, she felt the pull of the warp, like a tide dragging her forward into the maw of inevitability. And as her armor scraped against the cracked marble floors, she realized that the real battle had begun, not against her enemies, but against the slow, consuming horror that threatened to claim her very soul. Helena's vision blurred with sweat and tears as she finally reached the cathedral's heart. The demon waited there, not in a form she could describe, but in a presence that seemed to crush the air around her. Her bolter roared, echoing like thunder in the blackened halls, yet the shots seemed to vanish into nothingness, swallowed by the warp itself. She fell to her knees, exhausted, every prayer she had ever whispered pouring from her lips like blood. The creature reached for her, and in that instant, the true horror revealed itself, not in its form, but in what it reflected back at her. Her own fear, her own doubts, her own potential for corruption. And yet, even as despair threatened to drown her, Helena remembered why she had taken the vow of a sister of battle. She was the Emperor's wrath incarnate, the shield against chaos, the fire against corruption. Summoning every shred of faith and will, she rose, bolter in trembling hands, and unleashed a final, deafening volley. The demon shrieked, a sound that tore at reality itself, and then, with a final, blinding flash of holy light, it was gone. The cathedral was silent once more, but Helena knew the truth, the battle was never truly over. She had survived, but every scar, every memory, every shadow within her would remain as a reminder. The horrors of the warp were endless, the enemies eternal, and the life of a sister of battle was one of unending vigilance. And as she stood amidst the ruins, bloodied and battered but unbroken, She whispered a prayer not just for victory, but for the strength to endure the horrors yet to come. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and in that war, there is no mercy. The cathedral trembled under a silence that was almost deafening. Each echo of her own footsteps sounded like a death knell, bouncing off the cracked marble walls and twisted pillars. Helena's breath came in shallow bursts, her armor scorched, her body bruised from battles that seemed endless. Yet the real terror was not in the physical wounds, but in the whispers that slithered through her mind, testing her faith, questioning her purpose. Are you truly serving the Emperor, or are you merely a tool of destruction? The voice was soft, almost seductive, and it carried the weight of the warp itself. She tightened her grip on her bolter, nails digging into the worn grip, and forced herself forward. Every step felt like dragging her soul through fire. The remnants of holy icons glimmered faintly, their light weak against the encroaching darkness, yet Helena clung to them as if they were lifelines. Somewhere deeper in the cathedral, a presence stirred, something patient, ancient, and hungry. She could feel it watching, waiting, and for the first time she understood that the battlefield she had always known was only the beginning. The real war was inside her own mind, and the enemy had already breached her defenses. Yet Helena refused to kneel. She would rise, even if it meant stepping fully into the abyss. The echoes of the past, the screams of the dead, and the weight of the Imperium itself pressed upon her shoulders, but she would not falter. She could not. The Emperor demanded more, and in that demand lay both salvation and horror. The shadows seemed to writhe as Helena pressed deeper into the cathedral's shattered heart. Statues of saints and angels had twisted into grotesque parodies, their faces frozen in silent screams. Every step she took was a struggle against both the physical debris and the invisible pull of the warp. Then came the whispers again, louder now, tangled with the memories of the sisters she had lost. Katerine, Junia, why did you fail? The names clawed at her mind, each syllable like a dagger to her faith. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. Her bolter shook in her hands, not from fear, but from the oppressive energy that filled the air, thick and suffocating. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, the shadows stretching unnaturally toward her as if trying to consume her. From the darkness emerged shapes, half-formed, flickering figures of the damned, their eyes voids of infinite suffering. They moved with impossible speed, their mouths opening in silent screams that pressed against her mind. Helena's pulse quickened, but she held her ground, reciting every litany she knew, every prayer she had ever whispered. She was a sister of battle, she had been forged in fire and faith, and though the warp sought to break her, she would not yield. The creatures swirled around her, testing, probing, but she raised her bolter and fired, the sacred ammunition blazing with the Emperor's wrath. Light and fire clashed with shadow and despair, and in that instant, Helena understood a terrifying truth. This battle was endless, and the true enemy was the darkness that lived within as well as without. The air grew thick with the stench of ozone and burning flesh as Helena advanced deeper into the cathedral, each step echoing like a hammer in the void. The shadows were no longer static, they slithered and twisted, forming grotesque shapes that mocked the angels and saints she had once revered. Her bolter fired endlessly, each shot scorching flesh and spirit alike, yet for every wretch that fell, two more emerged from the darkness. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her, the countless sisters who had walked this path before her, their sacrifices etched into the walls in sodden blood. And then she heard it, a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The cathedral itself seemed alive, bending reality around her. The whispers became words, words became screams, and screams became visions, of comrades twisted into demonic forms, of the Emperor's light dimming, of the Imperium crumbling beneath. The endless tide of chaos. Helena's mind screamed for respite, for salvation, but there was none. She was alone, and the creatures that now prowled the shattered nave knew it. Her faith burned within her like a torch, fragile but defiant, and she realized the only way to survive was to confront not just the abominations before her, but the shadows festering within her own soul. Raising her bolter high, she screamed a litany of vengeance, the sound merging with the crackling of the warp energy around her, and charged into the black heart of the cathedral, determined to face whatever horror awaited. The battle for her mind, body, and faith had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. A sudden, unnatural stillness fell over the cathedral, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Helena's armor creaked under the weight of exhaustion, her lungs burning with every strained breath. Then, from the deepest shadows of the nave, it emerged, a demon, immense and twisting, its form impossible to comprehend, eyes like molten pits, and claws that seemed to slice through the very air. Its presence pressed down on her mind, dredging up every memory of fear, doubt, and failure. The whispers coalesced into a deafening chorus of condemnation. You are weak. You are nothing. You cannot save them. Helena staggered but forced herself to stand tall, gripping her bolter with every ounce of strength she had left. Every prayer she had ever spoken now became a weapon, a shield against the corruption clawing at her soul. She raised her voice in defiance, the litany of the Emperor echoing against the warped walls, and fired. The sacred rounds struck true, sizzling through the demon's form, yet it did not falter. It laughed, a sound that tore at reality itself. Helena felt the pull of the warp stronger than ever, tugging at her very being, threatening to drag her into the abyss. But she would not yield. She planted her feet, tightened her grip, and whispered a final vow. She would purge this evil, even if it cost her everything. The first clash was imminent, the clash of faith against the embodiment of chaos itself, and in that moment, Helena understood the truth that all sisters of battle must face. In the grim darkness of the far future, the only certainty is war, and the only salvation lies in unyielding resolve. The demon lunged, and the cathedral erupted into chaos. Shadows tore at the walls, twisting sacred statues into grotesque mockeries, and the air became thick with the acrid scent of ozone and charred stone. Helena's bolter roared, the sacred rounds striking the creature, but each impact seemed only to anger it further. Its form rippled and shifted, mocking her perception, twisting her surroundings into a living nightmare. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, yet she held her ground, feet braced, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and unwavering faith. The whispers became a cacophony, each one clawing at her memories, every sister lost, every mission failed, every doubt she had ever harbored. She gritted her teeth and recited the litany of faith aloud, the words slicing through the oppressive darkness like a blade of light. Flames ignited along the demon's body where her bolter rounds struck, hissing and curling into the warped air, but it pressed on relentlessly, each step distorting reality around her. Helena could feel her strength waning, the weight of centuries of devotion threatening to collapse beneath the horror before her. Yet she remembered the faces of her fallen sisters, the vows she had taken, and the Emperor's unwavering gaze upon her soul. With a roar that was both prayer and battle cry, she charged forward, bolter blazing, faith burning hotter than any weapon. The clash of light and shadow, of holy fury against the chaos of the warp, tore through the cathedral like an unending storm. Helena had become more than a soldier, she was the Emperor's wrath incarnate, and nothing, not even the heart of the warp itself, would make her falter. Helena's vision blurred with smoke and the shifting shadows of the warp, yet a single, burning clarity anchored her. She would not fall. The demon struck again, its claws tearing at the cathedral floor, leaving cracks that glowed with an unholy light. Helena rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the blow, and fired her bolter with precision born of desperation and faith. Sacred rounds struck the creature's flesh, burning and hissing as if the Emperor himself guided each shot. The air around her shimmered with energy, the warp recoiling from her unwavering will. She felt the presence of the Emperor like a whisper at the back of her mind, steadying her, reminding her of her vows. Her armor bore new scars, and every movement cost her more than just strength, each heartbeat echoed with the pain of every sister lost to the endless war. But in that pain, she found resolve. With a mighty cry, Helena surged forward, striking the demon with a relic blade she had kept hidden until this moment. The blade glowed with holy fire, slicing through the impossible flesh of the creature, forcing it to howl in rage and agony. Shadows twisted and screamed around her, the cathedral itself shuddering under the clash of holy power against warped corruption. Helena's mind burned with the intensity of the battle, yet she pressed on, each step a declaration. The Emperor's light would not be snuffed out, not here, not now. And as the demon faltered beneath the relentless fury of her faith and fire, she realized that victory was within reach, but it would demand every ounce of her soul, every shred of devotion she had ever possessed. The demon staggered, its writhing form flickering between realities, but Helena did not hesitate. Every ounce of fear, every doubt, every whisper that had clawed at her mind, she channeled into one final act of defiance. Her relic blade blazed with the Emperor's wrath, illuminating the cathedral with a searing light that burned away the shadows. With a roar that echoed across the shattered nave, she struck, plunging the weapon deep into the heart of the abomination. The creature shrieked, a sound that tore at reality, but Helena held fast, her faith anchoring her against the pull of the warp. Around her, the cathedral trembled violently, stones cracking and beams splintering as if the building itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Then, with a blinding flash, the demon dissolved into nothingness, leaving only a lingering cold and the faint whisper of the warp retreating. Helena collapsed to her knees, exhausted beyond measure, her body battered, her armor scorched, yet her spirit unbroken. She rose slowly, surveying the devastation around her, the echoes of battle still whispering in her ears. Every sacrifice, every loss, had led to this moment, and though the cathedral bore the scars of unholy corruption, the Emperor's light had endured. Helena knew the war was far from over, the forces of chaos would rise again, but in that instant, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of triumph. She had faced the abyss and had not faltered. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, she had stood as a beacon of defiance, a sister of battle unbroken, and a reminder that faith, courage, and devotion could carve a path through even the deepest shadow. Helena sank against a shattered pew, her chest heaving as the echoes of the demon's screams faded into an eerie silence. The cathedral, once a place of divine reverence, now lay in ruins, scarred by fire, smoke, and the lingering corruption of the warp. Every corner held the remnants of horrors she had faced, bodies twisted beyond recognition, holy relics defiled, and shadows that still seemed to twitch with unholy life. She could feel the weight of the dead pressing on her shoulders, the voices of lost sisters whispering in her mind, and yet she drew strength from them. Each memory of a fallen comrade was a vow, a promise that she would not let their sacrifices be in vain. And yet, amidst the devastation, a gnawing unease settled in her chest. The demon had been defeated, yes, but the warp never truly relinquishes its grip. Helena knew that this victory was but a fleeting reprieve, a momentary light in a universe defined by endless war. As she stood and surveyed the ruined nave, she realized that the horrors of her life were not confined to this battle alone. Every mission, every confrontation with chaos, every step into the heart of darkness, would demand more than her body, it would demand her soul. And still, she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the Imperium needed her, that the Emperor demanded her unwavering devotion. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and she, like all sisters of battle, must endure it, for the fire of faith burns brightest when all else falls to shadow. Do you ever wonder what it truly means to devote your life to the Emperor? To stand unflinching against the tide of heresy, corruption, and the endless horrors of the warp? Sister Helena had asked herself this every day since she had taken her vows, yet each day brought a new question. Had she truly pledged herself to the light, or merely signed her soul over to unending torment? The streets outside the cathedral were silent, a brittle quiet that carried the memory of fire and screams. Helena's armor gleamed dimly in the faint light of flickering candles, each dent and scorch mark a testament to battles survived and sisters lost. The smell of charred stone and incense mixed with the ever-present stench of decay, a reminder that the Imperium was never safe, never just, and never forgiving. She moved through the ruined halls like a shadow, a figure of unwavering faith walking in a world where faith itself was under siege. Every corner seemed alive, the shadows thickening unnaturally, stretching toward her as if the darkness itself sought to pull her into the warp. She could feel the whispers curling around her mind, distant but insistent, voices of doubt and temptation. Why do you fight? You cannot save them all. You cannot even save yourself. Helena clenched her fists, digging her nails into the worn grip of her gauntlets, forcing herself to breathe through the mounting fear. She had been trained to endure pain, to resist corruption, to act with purpose, but this was different. This was the weight of the Emperor's universe pressing down, reminding her that survival alone was not enough. As she reached the shattered altar, Helena paused, lifting her eyes to the cracked statue of the Emperor. Light flickered across its face, revealing the faintest trace of a smile, or perhaps a warning. She whispered a prayer, a litany she had learned as a child, and felt the familiar burn of conviction. Yet even as the holy words passed her lips, she knew the battle ahead would test not just her skill and courage, but the very essence of her faith. The shadows shifted again, darker now, deeper, and Helena's heart thudded, not from fear, but from the grim anticipation of what waited beyond. Somewhere in the cathedral, a presence stirred, patient, cunning, and unrelenting. And she, a sister of battle, would have to face it alone. The cathedral's halls stretched endlessly before her, each archway a scar upon the memory of holiness. Helena's boots echoed across the cracked marble floors, each step a reminder that she was alone. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the building itself had become a vessel for the warp, carrying whispers and half-formed voices that tickled the edges of her mind. She could almost hear the laughter of the demon that awaited her deeper within, a sound that was everywhere and nowhere, a presence that chilled her blood despite the burning heat of her faith. She paused at a shattered doorway, peering into the nave beyond. Shadows danced along the walls, contorting into grotesque parodies of the angels and saints once worshipped here. Some faces seemed disturbingly familiar, the visage of Sister Caterine, twisted and screaming silently, eyes empty, mouth frozen mid-cry. Helena recoiled, swallowing a gasp, but forced herself to move forward. Each step became heavier than the last, as if the cathedral were pressing against her will, weighing her down with the sins and failures of countless generations. Her mind fought against the insidious whispers. You cannot protect them, you cannot protect yourself. The Emperor has abandoned you. She gritted her teeth, forcing her thoughts back into focus. She had faced chaos countless times, yet this was different. This was the warp seeping into reality itself, turning memory and fear into weapons. Every corner of the cathedral seemed alive, writhing with shadows that reached for her, stretching impossibly long, coiling around pillars, slithering across the floor like black serpents. Helena tightened her grip on her bolter, feeling its sacred weight as a tether to her humanity and her faith. She remembered her vows, each one a chain forged in fire and faith, to serve the Emperor, to purge the heretic, to endure without question, and yet, as she pressed onward, the oppressive darkness tested her resolve at every turn. Flames ignited in the distance, candles long extinguished suddenly flaring to life, casting flickering light across grotesque mosaics of suffering and sacrifice. Helena whispered another prayer, louder this time, letting it echo through the cathedral, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows recoiled as though recognizing the power behind her words. But the reprieve was short-lived. From the far end of the nave came a low hum, vibrating through the stone in her bones. The sound was wrong, unnatural, and full of intent. Helena's pulse quickened. The demon was near, its presence curling around the edges of her mind, tugging, tempting, threatening. She took a steadying breath, forcing her fear into sharp focus, turning it into readiness. Each shadow that moved, each whisper that licked at her consciousness, became fuel for her resolve. Helena was a sister of battle, a servant of the Emperor, and she would not falter. Not here, not now, and so she stepped into the heart of the cathedral, every sense straining, every nerve alight with anticipation. The real test had begun, and with it, the full horrors of the warp were beginning to crawl from the darkness. Helena could feel them watching, calculating, waiting for the moment to strike. But she would not give them that victory. Her faith, her bolter, and her unyielding will were all she needed, for now, to face the unspeakable nightmare that lay ahead. The shadows deepened, twisting unnaturally as Helena advanced, each step a struggle against both the cathedral's ruin and the insidious pull of the warp. Shapes began to emerge from the darkness, forms that defied understanding, half-seen faces, limbs that bent impossibly, eyes that glimmered with an intelligence both alien and malevolent. Her bolter was raised, sacred ammunition glinting faintly in the flickering candlelight, yet she hesitated only for the briefest instant. The creatures were testing her, probing her faith, whispering doubts into the corners of her mind. You are alone, you cannot prevail. The words were soft, intimate, and yet they cut deeper than any blade. Helena felt her resolve falter, but she gritted her teeth and recalled every sister she had fought alongside, every oath she had taken, every prayer she had ever whispered. She was not alone, she was a sister of battle, the Emperor's wrath made flesh, and she would endure. The first creature lunged, a shadow that coalesced into a humanoid form, eyes voids of black flame, claws that seemed to scrape reality itself. Helena fired, and the bolter roared, sacred rounds burning through the abomination. It shrieked, a sound that clawed at the walls, echoing in her mind as well as her ears. The creature reformed, unharmed, mocking the futility of her attack. Helena's heart pounded. She realized this was no ordinary enemy, it was a fragment of the warp itself, feeding on fear, shaping itself from doubt and darkness. She advanced cautiously, her senses razor sharp, every shadow a potential threat. More shapes emerged, twisted reflections of angels and saints, their faces screaming silently, their hands reaching for her. Helena's armor clanged as she fired repeatedly, each shot cutting through the darkness, each prayer strengthening her resolve. She could feel the very walls of the cathedral trembling, as if the structure itself were aware of the intruding chaos. The whispers grew louder, voices layering upon each other until they became a deafening cacophony. You are weak. You have failed. You cannot save them. Helena's head throbbed with the intensity, but she focused on her faith, repeating the litanies she had recited since her novitiate. Flames seemed to flare around her relic icons, the sacred light pushing back against the shadows. For a moment, she felt invincible, a beacon of defiance in the encroaching darkness. Yet the creatures were relentless. They moved faster now, closing in from all sides, their forms bending and shifting impossibly, testing her, wearing down her mental defenses. Helena's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts, every muscle tense, every thought focused on survival and duty. She realized that the battle was not merely physical, this was a war for her mind, her soul, and her unwavering devotion to the Emperor. And then, from the deepest shadows of the cathedral, a presence stirred that made the very air vibrate, a demon, immense and impossible, its form flickering between reality and nightmare. Helena froze for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction. She knew that retreat was impossible, there was nowhere to run, and the Emperor demanded her courage, her strength, her faith. She tightened her grip on her bolter, whispered a final prayer, and stepped forward, prepared to confront the first true manifestation of warp horror. The real test of her life as a sister of battle had begun. The cathedral seemed to shudder as the demon advanced, its massive form shifting with unnatural fluidity, tendrils of shadow trailing behind it like living darkness. Every instinct screamed at Helena to flee, yet she stood firm, bolter raised, relic blade at her side, and faith burning hotter than ever. The whispers of the warp surged into a deafening roar, a cacophony of doubt and malice, clawing at her mind. You cannot win. You are nothing. Helena gritted her teeth, forcing herself to remember the faces of every sister who had fallen before her, every vow she had taken, every litany she had ever spoken. With a roar that was both prayer and battle cry, she fired her bolter, each sacred round striking the demon's impossible flesh, sizzling with divine light. The creature staggered, but did not falter. It moved faster now, circling her with inhuman speed, its claws scraping the marble floor, leaving blackened grooves that radiated corruption. Helena's heart pounded, but she focused on the rhythm of her prayers, letting each word guide her movements, her aim, her will. She knew she could not rely on strength alone, her faith had to be her weapon as much as her bolter. The demon lunged, and Helena barely rolled aside, bolter firing in rapid bursts, relic blade flashing with holy fire. Sparks of warp energy collided with the sacred light, a violent clash of chaos and devotion. Every swing of the demon's claws distorted the air, bending reality, warping shadows into grotesque parodies of angels and saints. Helena's mind screamed against the assault, memories of the fallen sisters flashing across her vision, Katerine, Junia, her entire squad lost in prior battles. She channeled the grief, the guilt, the unyielding devotion into a single, burning resolve: she would not falter. She could not falter. Summoning every ounce of strength, she charged, swinging her relic blade in a wide arc. The holy fire lanced through the demon's form, and for a moment, it shrieked in agony, the sound echoing like thunder through the cathedral. Helena pressed the attack, bolter roaring, every strike a prayer, every movement a testament to her faith. The creature writhed and twisted, claws raking the walls, but she held her ground, driven by the knowledge that the Emperor's light must endure, no matter the cost. As the clash intensified, Helena could feel the warp pulling at her very soul, tugging at her mind with whispers of surrender, tempting her with the promise of peace if only she let go. She gritted her teeth, blocking the mental intrusion with the power of her litany and the purity of her purpose. Flames erupted from the relic icons she carried, burning the shadows and illuminating the twisted architecture around her. Each burst of light seared the demon, forcing it to recoil, giving her precious moments to strike again. Time stretched, the battle becoming a blur of motion, fire, shadow, and prayer. Helena's vision swam with smoke, sweat, and tears, but she pressed on, bolter and blade a whirlwind of holy fury. And in that moment, she realized a terrifying truth: the battle was not just against the demon, but against the doubt and fear within herself. To defeat it, she had to purge not only the creature before her, but the shadows in her own heart. Helena's muscles screamed with exhaustion, her armor battered, her lungs burning, yet she refused to falter. The demon towered before her, its form flickering between nightmare and reality, tendrils of shadow lashing out like living darkness. Every corner of the cathedral seemed alive, writhing with malice, echoing the creature's defiance. Helena's bolter was nearly empty, her hands slick with sweat and blood, yet she did not hesitate. She gritted her teeth, whispered the Emperor's name, and raised her relic blade high. The blade flared with searing light, a beacon of divine fury in the heart of the warp-infested cathedral. Helena lunged, moving faster than her own exhaustion should have allowed, and drove the weapon deep into the demon's core. The creature shrieked, a sound that tore through the cathedral and rattled the very stones. Shadows recoiled violently, twisting into chaotic patterns, yet Helena held firm, her faith anchoring her in a way that mere physical strength could never achieve. The demon writhed, flames of holy fire searing its form, yet it would not yield immediately. It struck at her with its claws, tearing through the air, threatening to crush her resolve. Helena blocked with the flat of her blade, sparks flying as shadow met sacred metal. Each strike was a battle not just of body, but of soul, the warp reaching into her mind, clawing at her doubts, her fears, her memories of every sister lost. She gritted her teeth and focused, chanting litanies over and over, letting the words become her shield, her anchor, her weapon. With a final, deafening roar, she plunged the relic blade further, channeling every ounce of her will, every shred of faith, every memory of sacrifice. The demon screamed, reality itself seeming to tear asunder around it. Then, in a blinding flash of holy light, it disintegrated, leaving only the faintest trace of corruption in the air. Helena collapsed to her knees, gasping, armor scorched, body trembling, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She had survived the impossible, faced the ultimate horror of the warp, and emerged victorious. And yet, even in victory, the cathedral was a graveyard of shadows and fire. The bodies of the fallen sisters lay strewn across the marble floors, relics shattered, banners scorched. Helena rose slowly, her hands trembling, eyes scanning the ruin. The Emperor's light had endured, yet she knew the truth, the battle was never truly over. The forces of chaos would rise again, demons would return, and the warp would continue to test the limits of her faith. But Helena was a sister of battle, forged in fire and devotion. She would endure, as she always had, and as she always must. The cathedral was silent now, save for the faint echo of her own breathing in the distant, mournful whispers of the fallen. Helena knelt before the ruined altar, whispering prayers for the dead, for the Emperor, and for herself. She had faced the abyss and had not fallen. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but in that war, she remained a beacon of unyielding faith, a testament that even amidst the deepest shadow, the light of the Emperor could never be extinguished. Helena sank against the shattered altar, her body trembling, armor scorched, and lungs burning from the exertion. The cathedral was silent, yet the silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of fallen sisters, the echoes of the warp, and the weight of countless sacrifices. She gazed upon the ruined nave, the once sacred halls now marred by fire, shadow, and corruption, and allowed herself a fleeting moment to remember those who had fought and died alongside her. Yet even in this small respite, she knew the truth, the battle was far from over. Chaos would never rest, demons would rise again, and the warp would continue to gnaw at the edges of reality. Her victory was temporary, a momentary reprieve in the endless tide of war. But Helena was a sister of battle, a warrior forged in faith and fire. She would rise again, as she always had, ready to confront the horrors that awaited, armed with bolter, blade, and unbreakable devotion. She whispered a prayer, not just for the dead or the Emperor, but for herself, for the strength to endure the nightmares yet to come. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and in that war, there is no mercy. Yet Helena's light endured, a flickering but unyielding beacon in the shadowed cathedral, a reminder that faith, courage, and unshakable will could withstand even the darkest of horrors. With a deep, shuddering breath, she rose to her feet, bolter in hand, relic blade at her side, and stepped toward the shattered doors. Beyond them lay more battles, more horrors, more tests of faith. But Helena would face them, as she always had, as she always must. The life of a sister of battle is one of endless vigilance, sacrifice, and suffering, but it is also one of purpose, conviction, and the unwavering light of the Emperor. And as she disappeared into the shadows of the ruined cathedral, one truth remained clear: in a universe of unending war, Helena's faith, and her fight, would never die.